In a desert where every step could mean death, two enslaved women cling to each other, to memory, and to hope, fighting hunger, cruelty, and chaos, as the world around them burns. Will they survive the caravan, the markets, and the merciless desert, or will the sands swallow them forever? The chain of sand and silence. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast sheet of gold and ash beneath the merciless sun. Heat shimmered on the horizon, where dunes curved like the backs of sleeping beasts. A caravan moved slowly through this sea of sand, long lines of camels groaning beneath their burdens, merchants wrapped in white cloth to shield their faces, and at the rear, a smaller line of women bound together with rope and silence. These were the slave women of the Sahara's caravans. Some had been taken in raids from villages near the Niger River, others traded at bustling markets along the Maghreb coast. Their skin bore the very tones of Africa, deep ebony, bronze, and honeyed brown, but the dust painted them all in the same weary shade. Among them was Awa, her wrists raw where the rope bit into her. She walked barefoot, each step sinking into scorching sand. Her eyes, though tired, held the sharpness of someone who had not yet surrendered to despair. At her side shuffled Layla, younger, perhaps 15, whose tears had long since dried into salt on her cheeks. Awa often whispered encouragement to her when the guards were not listening. "Do not stumble," she murmured. "If you fall, they will not stop for you." Layla nodded faintly, gripping the rope before her as though it tethered her to survival itself. Around them, the caravan rang with the sounds of trade, the clink of coins, the creak of leather bags filled with salt slabs, ivory tusks, and sacks of gold dust. Merchants muttered in Arabic, Berber, and Hausa, haggling and laughing as if the women trailing behind were no more remarkable than the beasts of burden. But at night, when the fires burned low and the stars spilled silver across the desert, the women whispered to one another. They spoke of rivers and trees, of songs once sung at dusk in their villages, of mothers and sisters left behind. The desert could strip them of freedom, of family, of dignity, but not memory. Memory clung like breath. Awa, staring at the fire one night, whispered, "The desert takes many lives, but it also forgets nothing. Someday, our footsteps will be remembered in the sand." The younger women listened, their eyes reflecting the flames. For a moment, the chain between them felt less like iron, and more like a bond of survival. The desert wind howled, carrying away their words. Yet they remained, walking, enduring, alive. The March of Thirst. By the second week of their march, thirst was no longer a sharp pang but a dull ache that hollowed the women from the inside. The caravan leader rationed water carefully, saving the largest share for the camels and traders. The slaves were given a swallow at dawn and another at dusk, barely enough to wet their cracked lips. Awa learned to conserve her strength. She pressed her tongue against her teeth to catch the last drops of saliva, and when the guards weren't watching, she scooped grains of sand into her mouth just to trick her body into believing it held something. The trick only worked for moments, but moments could be the difference between standing and collapsing. Layla faltered more often, her young frame not yet hardened to deprivation. When she stumbled, one of the guards struck her shoulder with a stick, barking in a language she barely understood. She fell to her knees, coughing sand, the rope tugging against her neck. "Stand!" Awa hissed urgently, bending low as though adjusting her step. "Stand, child, before he strikes again." That night, when the camels were tethered and the fires lit, Awa tore a strip from the hem of her garment and dampened it in the dregs of her water skin. She pressed the cloth to Layla's lips. "It tastes like dust," Layla murmured weakly. "It is still water," Awa said. "And you will live because of it." Layla's eyes glistened in the firelight. She clutched Awa's hand, as though that fragment of kindness was a thread that could bind her spirit to the earth. Around them, Other women tended to one another in small ways, massaging swollen ankles, whispering prayers in Wolof, Fulani, and Songhai. The desert was merciless, but their care carved small sanctuaries amid the endless march. Beyond the firelight, the merchants laughed over cups of bitter tea, speaking of profit and markets, of how many coins a strong young girl might fetch in Tunis or Cairo. The women heard, but did not respond. They had no voice in such matters. Yet their silence was not consent, it was survival. The wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of another day's journey. Awa gazed at the stars, those fixed, unyielding lights, and wondered how many of them shone over her village far away. She whispered into the night, half prayer, half defiance. "We are not forgotten. We walk, but we endure." The sandstorm. The desert was never still. By day, it blazed with heat, by night, it whispered with wind. But on the 10th day, the whisper swelled into a roar. It began as a tremor in the horizon, a brown haze gathering like an angry cloud. The caravan leaders muttered anxiously, eyes narrowed against the rising blur. Soon the wind lashed against them, grains of sand cutting like knives against exposed skin. Camels bellowed, stamping their hooves in protest. "Storm!" someone shouted in Arabic. The command rippled down the line. Men scrambled to cover their faces with cloth, pulling camels to their knees, forcing them into huddled groups. For the slave women, there was no shelter. The ropes binding them became both prison and lifeline. Awa wrapped her arms around Layla and pressed her face into the younger girl's shoulder. Sand scoured every exposed surface, filling their ears, eyes, and mouths. The air itself became unbreathable. "Hold on!" Awa shouted, though her voice was swallowed by the howl of the wind. She leaned into the pull of the rope, feeling the others straining with her, their bodies instinctively clumping together against the storm. The sky vanished into a churning wall of dust. Day turned to something worse than night, darkness filled not with rest, but with suffocation. Awa's lungs burned as she gasped through her veil, grains of sand grinding between her teeth. Layla whimpered, and Awa pulled her closer, shielding her as best she could. Minutes, or hours, it was impossible to know, dragged on in a blur of stinging lashes and roaring air. Women fell to their knees, clinging to the rope, coughing, retching. One of the guards stumbled past, his turban torn loose, his face wild with panic. The storm did not distinguish between master and slave, it consumed all. When at last the winds began to die, the desert revealed its cruelty. Sand had swallowed half the supplies, burying bags of salt and grain. One camel lay dead, its body half covered already by shifting dunes. And among the women, 2 did not rise. Layla clutched Awa's arm, her eyes wide as she saw the still forms half hidden in the sand. Awa pulled her close, whispering hoarsely, "Do not look! Step forward. Breathe." The survivors staggered onward, coughing out the grit from their lungs. The storm had taken its share, but those who lived carried on, bound tighter now, not only by rope, but by the knowledge that survival came not from strength alone, but from clinging to one another. That night, no one sang by the fire. The stars glimmered coldly above, indifferent, while the desert claimed its silence once again. Hunger's grip. The sandstorm had not only claimed lives but also much of the caravan's food. Sacks of grain lay buried beyond recovery, and the traders, muttering bitterly, divided what little remained. The camels groaned under emptier loads, and men sharpened their tempers as their stomachs hollowed. For the women at the back, the rations were meager before, now they were nearly nothing. A handful of dried dates was passed along the line at dusk, meant to feed 10. Each woman bit carefully, letting the sweetness linger as long as possible before swallowing. For some, there was no portion left by the time the dates reached them. Awa tore her piece in two and slipped the smaller half to Layla when the guards weren't watching. Eat slowly, she whispered. Chew it as if it is many. Layla obeyed, her thin fingers trembling. Her eyes carried both gratitude and shame. You need it more than I, she said softly. I have endured worse, Awa lied. In truth, her belly twisted with hunger, a sharp pain that refused to let her sleep. But she would not let the girl starve. As the days passed, hunger became a second chain. The women's steps grew sluggish, their bodies thin shadows of what they had been. One older woman, her hair streaked with gray, collapsed in the sand. She tried to rise once, twice, then lay still, her breath gone. The guards did not stop. They cut the rope from her wrists and left her body behind, the desert already moving to cover her. The women kept walking, heads bowed, eyes fixed on the feet before them. They learned to swallow the gnawing ache, to turn hunger into a rhythm of endurance. At night, when sleep evaded them, they spoke in whispers of food as if it were a prayer: yam stews rich with spice, millet porridge stirred thick, roasted goat seasoned with salt. Layla described the mango tree that grew outside her mother's hut, the sweetness of fruit dripping down her chin. The women closed their eyes and tasted it on their tongues, if only in memory. Awa listened, her stomach twisting, but she encouraged them to speak. Remember, she said quietly, the desert cannot take what lives in our minds. But even memory had its limits. By the 5th day after the storm, lips cracked, ribs pressed like reeds against thin skin, and every step felt like carrying a mountain. Hunger was no longer an ache. It was a voice whispering that survival was too costly. And yet, chained together, they moved forward, one step, then another, leaving behind a trail of footprints the wind would soon erase. The oasis. On the 15th morning, when the sun still hung low and pale, the horizon shifted from unbroken gold to a shimmer of green. Palms swayed faintly in the distance, their tops like promises carved against the sky. An oasis. The caravan quickened, camels lifting their heads as if they too smelled the water. The guards barked at the women to keep pace, tugging ropes, striking the sand with their sticks. Even exhaustion could not blunt the sharp pull of hope. Feet dragged faster, hearts beat harder, lips cracked wider with anticipation. When they reached the water's edge, the men crowded first, plunging their faces into the shallow pool, splashing greedily. Camels knelt, grunting as they drank. Dust and sweat washed into the basin, muddying it, but the water was life, and life was rarely clean. The women were held back until the men had finished. Only when the guards gestured did they shuffle forward, stumbling on knees that nearly gave way. Awa bent low, cupping water in her hands, letting it spill cool across her face before she drank. The relief was so sharp it hurt. Layla dropped beside her, plunging her entire face into the pool. Awa caught her by the arm. Slowly, she warned. Too much at once will sicken you. The girl nodded, gasping, then sipped more carefully. They lingered only briefly before the guards pulled them away, allowing them shade under a cluster of date palms. The traders lounged nearby, sipping tea brewed sweet, their voices raised in laughter. They spoke of routes ahead, how many days until the next market, which town would bring the best price for salt, ivory, and human lives. The women ate dates from the palms, sticky and rich, their bellies aching both from hunger and the sudden flood of food. Some whispered prayers of thanks. Others stared at the pool, wondering how many steps of desert still stretched between this breath and their fate. That night, under the stars, the oasis became a sanctuary. The women washed their faces and arms, scrubbing sand from wounds, letting cool water soothe cracked lips. For a few hours, they felt almost human again. Layla leaned against Awa's shoulder, murmuring, I dreamed the water would carry us home. Awa stroked her hair. Water does not carry us, she said. But it lets us walk further. That is enough. Beyond the palm grove, jackals cried into the night, and the caravan leader counted his goods, whispering of profit. But under the trees, bound by rope and memory, the women let themselves imagine freedom, if only for the space of one oasis night. The threat on the horizon. The morning after the oasis, the caravan pressed onward, bellies heavier with dates, skins filled with water, spirits sharpened. Yet the desert, vast and unknowable, never offered peace for long. By the third day's march, the guards grew restless. Their eyes swept the horizon more often, hands lingering on the hilts of their blades. Awa noticed it first, the way their chatter turned clipped, the way one rider rode ahead and back again, scanning the dunes as though searching for something unseen. Whispers drifted down the line. Raiders. The desert held no shortage of them, men who lived by ambushing caravans, seizing goods, slaughtering guards, and claiming captives as spoils. For the merchants, raiders were a financial threat. For the women trailing at the rear, they were another kind of terror. That night, as the fires burned low, Awa pressed close to Layla and the others. "If raiders come," she said softly, "do not run. They will strike you down if you flee." Layla shivered. "Then what do we do?" "We endure," Awa answered grimly. "As we have endured everything else." Sleep came in fits. The wind shifted, carrying with it faint sounds, distant hoofbeats, perhaps imagined, perhaps real. The guards muttered, posted more sentries, sharpened their weapons until sparks flared. At dawn, the threat revealed itself. On the horizon, tiny black figures crested a dune, riders, their banners snapping in the wind. The caravan erupted into movement. Traders shouted, guards mounted their camels, swords and spears flashed in the early light. The women were herded together, ropes tightened, shoved down into the sand where they crouched like livestock in a pen. Awa pulled Layla close, her heart hammering in her chest. She had seen battles before, raids on her own village, long ago, but never had she been trapped at the center of one. The raiders descended with a roar, their horses kicking up clouds of sand. The clash of steel and cries of men echoed across the dunes. Camels bellowed, bucking under their loads. The desert itself seemed to shudder with the violence. From their place on the ground, the women could see flashes, blood on the sand, a guard tumbling from his camel, a raider cut down with a scream. Layla pressed her face against Awa's shoulder, trembling, while the rope that bound them pulled tighter with every lurch. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the fighting scattered across the sands, the desert swallowing the chaos into distance. Whether the raiders were driven off or retreated by choice, no one knew. What remained was silence, punctuated by the groans of the wounded and the low sobs of women who had glimpsed yet another kind of fate. Awa lifted her head, scanning the horizon. The desert was vast, the sky unbroken, but she knew one truth that neither raiders nor merchants could erase: survival, for them, meant never surrendering hope, even when hope was as fragile as a thread of rope in the shifting sand. The aftermath of blades. When the dust of the skirmish finally settled, the desert looked like a battlefield disguised in gold. Camels lay still, their long necks twisted unnaturally. A handful of men bled into the sand, groaning until their voices thinned to silence. The survivors moved quickly, stripping the dead of their water skins, knives, and cloth before the dunes swallowed them whole. The caravan leader stormed among the lines, his white turban stained with sweat and blood. His fury fell hardest on the women. He accused them of being burdens, of slowing the march, of inviting weakness into the caravan. Though they had not lifted a hand in the fight, they bore its punishment. That night their rations were halved. Where once a date or two had been shared, now they were given only one between four. The rope that bound their wrists was pulled tighter, leaving welts and swelling hands. The guards paced more often, striking with sticks at the smallest stumble. Layla wept quietly into the crook of her elbow. "Why us?" she whispered. Awa held her close, her voice steady though her own ribs ached with hunger. "Because we are the ones who cannot strike back. The desert has taught them cruelty, and they pass it down as if it were law." Yet even in punishment, the women wove threads of defiance. They shared scraps of cloth to bind wounds. They shifted their bodies so that one might lean when her knees weakened. They hummed old lullabies under their breath, songs from riverside villages, forest clearings, and marketplaces long gone. One night, as the moon rose full over the dunes, an older woman named Fatima whispered a story from her people. She spoke of a jackal who tricked lions by pretending weakness, who survived by waiting until the lions had exhausted themselves. The women listened, their eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The tale was not only of animals, it was of them. Awa held the story in her heart. Survival, she realized, was not measured only in flesh and bone. It was measured in memory, in the sharing of words, in the small refusals to break. When dawn came, the guards yanked them to their feet, barking commands. The rope burned fresh marks into their wrists. The desert awaited, endless and merciless. But the women walked together, eyes lowered, steps steady. They bore their hunger, their thirst, their punishment. And though the men saw only silence, within each woman the story of the jackal lived, quiet but unyielding. Stones beneath bare feet. After days of dunes, the desert changed its shape. The soft, rolling sands gave way to jagged ground, stretches of stone and gravel that tore at the women's bare feet with every step. The sun, reflected off the pale rocks, seemed fiercer than before, doubling its heat, burning the skin even through cloth. The camels stumbled, groaning, their padded feet not made for sharp stone. Guards cursed and lashed them forward, their tempers already thinned by loss. The traders muttered of omens, storms, raiders, now treacherous ground. But still the caravan pressed onward, for to stop was death. For the women, each step was a battle. Cuts opened on their soles, blood seeping into the grit. Awa bit her lip against the sting, her body swaying as she tried to carry her weight carefully. Layla faltered often, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. Awa tightened her grip on the rope between them, steadying her, whispering, "One more step. Always one more." By midday, the heat shimmered so fiercely that the horizon blurred. The air itself seemed to ripple like water, mocking their thirst. The guards allowed no pause. When one woman stumbled and fell, her knees scraping raw, she was dragged until she found her footing again. The desert was not kind, and neither were those who commanded the march. That night, their feet were swollen and bloodied. The women huddled together, sharing the last scraps of cloth torn from their garments to bind wounds. Fatima hummed the jackal's song again, her voice cracked but steady. Layla leaned against Awa, whispering through exhaustion, "I dream of cool grass, of river water on my feet." Awa stroked her hair, her own eyes fixed on the stars. "Dreams are rivers that carry us further than the desert will allow," she said softly. The guards, restless, muttered among themselves. Supplies were thinning, and the caravan had yet far to go. Fear bred cruelty, and cruelty fell most easily upon those bound in silence. But the women had their own silence, one that was not weakness, but a fortress. Beneath the hush of the desert night, they held one another's stories, one another's weight. In the morning, when the stones cut again, they walked together. And though the desert took from them with every step, it could not strip the invisible strength that passed along the rope, hand to hand, heart to heart. When one falls, the rocky ground showed no mercy, and neither did the march. By the third day among the stones, the women's feet had become open wounds. Blood smeared into dust until each step left a faint print, a trail the wind quickly erased. It was Fatima who stumbled first. Her breath had grown ragged the day before, but she had hidden it with stories, her cracked voice weaving hope into the darkness. This morning, though, her legs gave way beneath her, and she crumpled onto the gravel, the rope jerking her forward until the line halted. A guard strode back, cursing, his stick raised. But before he struck, Awa shifted, placing herself between Fatima and the blow. She bowed her head, a gesture of submission, though her spine stiffened with defiance. "She needs water," Awa said in halting Arabic. The man sneered. "She is finished. Water is wasted." He moved to cut the rope from Fatima's wrists, the same ritual as before with the fallen. But Fatima's eyes fluttered open. She grabbed Awa's hand weakly. "Do not fight," she whispered in her own tongue, too faint for the guard to hear. "Walk. Carry my story." Awa's throat ached. She wanted to argue, to lift the older woman to her feet. But Fatima's grip was clear, her will unbroken even as her body failed. The guard sliced through the rope. Fatima's wrist fell free, limp against the stones. The caravan moved on. The women looked back only once, watching the wind already drift sand and dust across Fatima's still form. Her song, her jackal's tale, lingered in their chests. That night silence weighed heavy. Even the guards seemed subdued, muttering in low voices. The women huddled close, their bodies aching, their spirits thin as thread. It was Layla who broke the silence. "Tell it again," she whispered to Awa. "The jackal's story." Awa hesitated, then spoke. Her voice was hoarse, but each word carried Fatima's memory forward. The women listened, eyes closed, seeing the cunning creature survive against lions. For a moment, Fatima lived again in the sound of her tale. When the story ended, Awa added softly, "The desert takes bodies, but it cannot take stories. And so Fatima walks with us still." The women nodded, their faces hidden in shadow, and the rope that bound them seemed for once less like a chain, and more like a thread that stitched them together. The Market of Eyes. After weeks of burning sun and cruel stone, the desert broke open into something almost miraculous, a settlement. Mud-brick walls rose against the horizon, low towers catching the first light of dawn. The smell of dust gave way to the faint tang of spices, sweat, and smoke. For the caravan, this was not home, but profit. For the women, it was another kind of peril. The guards barked orders, forcing the camels into line. The women were pushed into a shaded courtyard, hemmed in by high walls. Here, their ropes were untied, but not their captivity. Instead, they were made to stand in rows, backs straight, hands visible, eyes lowered. Soon buyers came. Men with robes finer than the guards, their fingers stained with henna or ink. Their eyes flicked over the women like merchants judging figs for ripeness. They lifted chins with careless hands, prodded arms to test muscle, even tugged at hair to see if it was thick. The women endured in silence, their bodies treated as goods. Awa held her head still, her jaw clenched. Layla trembled beside her, trying not to cry. One buyer inspected her too long, tracing the line of her cheek as if she were a jar to be polished. Awa shifted slightly, placing her own body forward, as though by chance. The man frowned at her interference, then moved on. Not all buyers came for cruelty. A few sought household workers, seamstresses, cooks. Yet even then, the transaction was cold, price tags on souls. Fatima's absence ached sharper here, for she had always softened despair with words. Without her, the silence felt jagged. By evening, some women were led away, ropes looped around wrists once more. Others remained, unsold or perhaps saved for another day. Awa and Layla stayed together, though the fear of separation pressed down on them like a blade. That night, in the corner of the courtyard, the women whispered among themselves. Some prayed in their own languages, some muttered curses against the traitors. Awa traced lines in the dust with her finger, a river, a hut, the shapes of home. Layla watched, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Even here, Layla whispered, you carry home in your hands. Awa looked up at the stars, half hidden by the courtyard's walls. As long as we remember, she said softly, home walks beside us. Even if our feet never return. The guards patrolled with swords at their hips, the traders counted coins in lantern glow, and the women clung to the invisible threads of memory that no market could sell. The parting of the rope. Morning came with the clatter of locks and the scrape of gates. The courtyard stirred as guards herded the women into a tighter row. Buyers had returned, their voices sharp, their coins ready. The smell of dates and roasted barley wafted faintly from the nearby market, but none of that sweetness touched the women, only the metallic taste of fear. The trader in charge barked names and prices. Awa and Layla stood shoulder to shoulder, gripping each other's hands tightly until the guards pried them apart. One man, his robes lined with indigo, pointed toward Layla. He murmured with another, their heads bent as though she were no more than a bolt of cloth being measured. The guard tugged her forward. Layla cried out softly, twisting to look at Awa. Their eyes met, one wide with terror, the other burning with helpless rage. Awa tried to surge after her, but the butt of a spear pressed against her ribs, forcing her back. Layla stumbled into the man's keeping. He inspected her wrists, her shoulders, the curve of her back. Satisfied, he pressed silver coins into the trader's palm. Just like that, she was led out of the courtyard, her head turning again and again until she vanished beyond the gate. Awa's breath caught in her throat. The rope that had once bound them together was gone, and the emptiness where Layla's hand had been felt heavier than chains. She wanted to scream, but no sound rose. Around her, other women wept quietly, some praying under their breath. Her own sale came later that day. A household buyer, older and heavy-set, demanded a servant for grinding grain. He glanced over Awa, noting her broad shoulders. She was purchased with little ceremony, led away with a rope looped loosely around her wrists. As she crossed the threshold of her new confinement, Awa looked back one last time at the courtyard where so many had stood. The dust still bore the faint marks she had drawn the night before, the river, the hut, the shapes of home. The wind was already blurring them, but for her, they were carved into memory. She whispered, too low for any guard to hear. Layla, walk in strength. I will carry you in silence. And so, the rope that had once tethered them gave way to something stronger. An invisible bond stretched across walls, across streets, across the very desert that had swallowed their freedom. Layla's new walls. Layla's new life began behind carved cedar doors, their hinges creaking as if groaning at yet another soul passing into silence. The indigo-robed man who had purchased her was called Malik. His household was not the largest in the town, but its walls rose high, shutting out both desert wind and wandering eyes. Within, shaded courtyards hummed with bees and the scent of figs ripening in clay bowls. Layla was not brought to the mistress of the house, nor introduced to the other servants. Instead, she was shown directly to her work. A grinding stone sat beneath a canopy, already heavy with millet waiting to be turned into flour. A guard dropped a basket at her feet, muttered something she barely understood, and left. Her shoulders ached as she bent to the task, her arms untrained for such labor. The stone scraped and groaned, the millet breaking under her effort. Dust rose, coating her lips, sticking to the sweat on her brow. She thought of Awa, how her strong hands might have steadied the stone, how her steady gaze might have carried her through this moment. But now there was only silence, broken by the grinding's rhythm. By evening, her back throbbed. A young boy brought her a bowl of thin lentil stew and a crust of bread. He did not speak, only placed it down and left. Layla ate slowly, each bite reminding her of the bitter truth. She was here, alone, and Awa was somewhere else beyond these walls. That night, lying on a mat in a dim corner, she whispered into the dark. "Awa, can you hear me? The rope is gone, but I am still walking." Her voice was little more than breath, but it steadied her. In the days that followed, she learned the patterns of the household. Women moved quietly, their eyes lowered, their hands never still, kneading dough, tending lamps, washing clothes. Some were slaves like her, some free but bound by duty to masters and mistresses alike. None spoke openly. Yet in their glances, in the faint nods exchanged at the well, Layla sensed a hidden current of solidarity. And so she began to build her own small fortress of endurance. Each morning, she traced with her finger a line in the dust beside the grinding stone, a river, flowing endlessly. No guard noticed. No master cared. But to her, it was resistance, memory, and hope braided into one. Awa's hearth of ashes. Awa's new world was smaller than the desert, smaller even than the caravan's rope-bound silence. She was delivered into the kitchen of a merchant's household, a place where smoke clung to the walls and the air carried the constant tang of ash, cumin, and boiling oil. The mistress of the house, a sharp-eyed woman draped in linen, glanced over Awa only once before pointing toward the grinding stones. "Strong arms," she said curtly to the overseer. "Keep her busy. Bread does not knead itself." And so Awa was set among the fires, where women bent over pots and ovens, their faces slick with sweat. Some were slaves, others wives of poor relations, all trapped in labor that left little room for words. Yet, in their silence, Awa recognized something familiar. She learned quickly how to knead dough until her arms burned, how to stir thick stews without letting them stick, how to rise before dawn to bake bread for the household. Her palms hardened, her shoulders ached, but her gaze remained steady. Each night, when the kitchen fires dimmed, she would sit near the embers and draw with ash on the hearthstones. She sketched rivers, huts, and sometimes a single line stretching outward, the rope, now invisible, that still connected her to Layla. The other kitchen women noticed. One, an older slave with a scar across her cheek, asked softly in a tongue mixed with Arabic, "What do you draw, girl?" "Home," Awa whispered. The woman's eyes lingered, then she nodded once. No more was said. But from that night on, when Awa traced her ash lines, no one disturbed her. Though her body served the household, her mind traveled. When she carried bread to the storerooms, she imagined handing a crust to Layla. When she washed the grinding stone, she imagined Layla doing the same across the city. She whispered the jackal's tale beneath her breath, carrying Fatima's memory as though it were a lamp against the dark. The desert had torn them apart, but it had not swallowed everything. In the secret spaces of kitchens and courtyards, in the dust of markets and the quiet of nights, Awa and Layla each wove survival into something more, an invisible thread stretched taut, never broken. Layla before the mistress. Layla's chance came one morning when Malik's wife summoned her. The order carried through the courtyard like a ripple, servants exchanging wary glances. No one went before the mistress lightly. She was known for her sharp tongue and colder heart, a woman who ruled her household as firmly as her husband ruled his trade. Layla was led to the women's hall, where woven mats softened the floor and alabaster lamps glowed faintly. The mistress reclined on a cushioned seat, her fingers heavy with rings, her gaze cool and appraising. "So," the woman said in a measured voice, "you are the one Malik brought home." Her eyes traveled over Layla's frame, pausing at her bruised wrists and calloused hands. "Young. Still unshaped. We shall see if you are worth what he paid." Layla bowed her head, keeping her voice steady though her chest fluttered. "I will serve as I can, mistress." The woman tilted her head, as if testing the weight of those words. Then she gestured to a tray piled with figs and bread. "Bring it." Layla stepped forward, careful not to stumble. She lifted the tray, its brass surface hot from the sun, and carried it with both hands to the seat. Her arms trembled, but she set it down smoothly. The mistress watched closely. "You walk quietly. That is good. Speak little, work much, that is better. If you do so, you may last here." Something in her tone was not kindness, nor cruelty, but a simple truth: survival depended on silence and obedience. Layla lowered her gaze, but in her chest, she repeated Awa's words like a shield: "Home walks beside us, even if our feet never return." The mistress dismissed her with a flick of her hand. As Layla turned to go, she felt eyes lingering on her back, weighing her, measuring her place in the household. She did not stumble. She would not. Later, as she returned to the grinding stone, one of the older servants slipped her a look that carried both warning and sympathy. "You did well," the woman murmured, her lips barely moving. Layla said nothing, but her heart steadied. The mistress had seen her, judged her, and she had endured. In this house of walls and whispers, endurance was survival, and survival, for her, was another step toward the invisible rope she still felt stretching across the city, pulling her toward Awa. Tests of loyalty. In the weeks that followed, both Awa and Layla learned that survival was not only about enduring hunger, or heat, or the grinding stone. It was about navigating the invisible tests their masters and mistresses set before them, tests designed to measure loyalty, obedience, and fear. For Awa, the test came in the kitchen. One evening, a pot of stew bubbled too long, and the bottom burned, sending a bitter scent through the air. The mistress's temper was quick, her punishments sharper. Another servant, the scarred woman who had once asked about Awa's drawings, was blamed. The mistress raised her hand to strike, but Awa stepped forward. "It was I," Awa said quietly, lowering her eyes. "My hand lingered too long." The room stilled. The mistress glared, her palm hovering. Then, to everyone's surprise, she lowered it. "At least you admit it," she said coldly. "See it does not happen again." She swept out, skirts trailing. The scarred woman touched Awa's arm lightly as the door closed. "Foolish girl," she murmured. "But brave." Awa said nothing, though her chest thudded. In that moment, she realized that loyalty could mean bending the truth not for masters, but for each other. For Layla, the test came more quietly. Malik's wife summoned her again, this time with another servant kneeling nearby, a girl accused of stealing a figure. The mistress's gaze flicked between them. "Did you see her take it?" she asked Layla. Layla's stomach tightened. She had not seen. But she knew the mistress wanted confirmation, a voice to seal the accusation. The kneeling girl's eyes pleaded silently, wide and desperate. "No, mistress," Layla said at last, steady but soft. "I did not see her hand upon the fruit." The hall was silent. The mistress studied her long, as though peeling away her skin. At last, she waved her hand. "Then let it go. If she is clever enough to hide it from two pairs of eyes, perhaps she deserves the bite." Relief rippled through the servants later that night. The girl pressed her forehead against Layla's hand, whispering thanks. Layla only nodded, but inside she felt a flicker of strength. She had spoken carefully, not too bold, not too timid, and had shielded another without drawing the lash upon herself. And so, in different houses, beneath different eyes, Awa and Layla learned the same lesson, that survival was not only silence, but choice. And that each choice stitched them closer to the women around them, weaving a hidden net of solidarity stronger than any chain. rumors in the dust. The town shifted as if restless beneath the desert sun. Whispers carried through market stalls, darted between courtyards, and found their way even into kitchens and grinding yards. Traders spoke of raiders striking caravans, of tribal feuds flaring along the routes. Some said the governor's tax collectors had grown too greedy, others that famine pressed against the edges of the land like a storm cloud. For Awa, the rumors arrived in fragments, guards muttering over bread, merchants arguing outside the kitchen door. She listened as she kneaded dough, ears sharper than her hands. Once she heard a servant hiss. Another caravan was taken, men slain, goods stolen. The mistress silenced her with a glare, but the words had already sunk like stones into Awa's thoughts. In Layla's household, the unrest touched closer. Malik grew harsher, snapping at his servants, pacing through the halls with accounts and ledgers clutched in his hands. His wife muttered of shortages, her rings flashing as she tallied what was missing from storerooms. The tension dripped down like water through cracks, soaking the women who worked under them. One evening, as Layla carried a jar of water across the courtyard, she overheard two guards speaking low. If the roads close, the trade dies. And if the trade dies, these walls fall with it. That night, lying on her mat, Layla pressed her palms together, imagining Awa somewhere else in the same city, perhaps hearing the same whispers. Were they closer now, or further apart? The rope between them still held, but it trembled with uncertainty. In Awa's kitchen, too, unease grew. The scarred woman leaned close as they swept ash. "Trouble brews," she murmured, her eyes darting to be sure no overseer listened. "When trouble comes, masters grow careless. And in carelessness, paths open." Awa met her gaze. The words kindled something she had not dared name, possibility. The desert had stripped them, the market had chained them, the households had bent them. But beyond the walls, the town itself shifted, cracked, and whispered of change. And in those cracks, faint as they were, Awa and Layla each began to wonder, was survival the only story, or could something more be written in the dust? The streets in flames. The first sign was the smell. Not bread, not spice, but smoke, heavy and sharp, drifting through alleyways like a warning. By midday, shouts followed, then the clash of metal and the wild thrum of panic. The town's heartbeat shifted, pounding with fear. In Malik's household, Layla was herding jars of grain into the storeroom when the gates slammed shut. Guards rushed to the walls, their spears glinting. Malik's wife barked orders, her face pale beneath her jewels. "Bolt every door! No one leaves!" Servants scattered like frightened birds, their hands trembling as they latched shutters. Layla pressed herself against the cool wall, her own pulse racing. From outside came cries, men shouting of raiders, of fire, of the governor's men turning against one another. She could not see the flames, but she could feel them in the heat pressing against the air, in the restless crackle that carried even through stone. Across the city, in the merchant's kitchen, Awa crouched by the hearth as the mistress strode in, snapping at the cooks to ration water. The scarred woman caught Awa's wrist, whispering, "It begins." Awa lifted her eyes toward the smoke curling through the vents. Fear coiled in her gut, but so did something else, a sharpness, an edge she had not felt since the desert march. By nightfall, chaos swallowed the streets. The sound of hooves thundered through the town, followed by screams, then sudden silence. No servant was allowed near the gates, yet rumors poured in like water through cracks. Warehouses looted, guards slain, whole caravans set aflame. Layla lay awake on her mat, her heart beating in rhythm with the clamor outside. She thought of Awa, somewhere in this city sealed tight. Was she safe? Was she afraid? Did she, too, feel the trembling shift beneath their chains? In the kitchen, Awa stared into the embers of the fire. The scarred woman whispered again, When fire burns walls, sometimes doors open. Awa did not reply, but she pressed her palm into the ash, drawing once more a single long line, the rope, stretched but never broken. The night roared. The city trembled. And for the first time since the desert march began, the silence of the enslaved felt less like surrender, and more like the gathering of breath before a storm. Cracks in the walls? The morning after the smoke, the town was changed. Doors that once held firm now sagged on broken hinges. Markets that once sang with barter stood silent, their stalls overturned, baskets scattered like bones. And within the great houses, fear gnawed at masters and mistresses alike. In Malik's home, the mistress paced the women's hall, her fingers tugging at her veil. Malik himself had not returned since dawn, leaving her restless and sharp-tongued. "Lock the storerooms again," she snapped. "Count the grain. Twice. No, thrice." Her orders spiraled into desperation. Layla obeyed, carrying jars with aching arms, but her ears were sharper than her hands. She heard it whispered by 2 guards at the gate. The raiders had broken through one quarter of the town, and the governor's men were retreating. The walls of power that had always seemed unshakable now trembled like reed mats in the wind. Across the city, Awa's household reeled as well. The merchant had fled to join other traders at the governor's palace, seeking protection. In his absence, the mistress shouted less, her voice edged not with command but with worry. The scarred woman leaned close to Awa as they kneaded bread. "See how they fear? When masters fear, slaves must watch. Doors open in fear that never open in strength." That night, the kitchen was left unsupervised longer than usual. The guards had gone to the walls, and the mistress had retreated to her chamber. Awa slipped toward the courtyard, her eyes lifted to the smoke-streaked sky. She was not free, not yet, but for the first time, she could move without eyes piercing her back. She pressed her hand to the gate's wood. Locked, but trembling under its own weight. In Malik's courtyard, Layla dared something small but dangerous. As she drew water from the well, she let her eyes rise, scanning the horizon beyond the walls. Fires smoldered in the distance, and for a fleeting moment she imagined running, through alleys, through smoke, perhaps even across the desert again. Her hand trembled, spilling water down her arm. She whispered Awa's name as though it might anchor her. Neither woman acted yet. But the cracks had come, hairline fissures in walls once thought eternal. And in those cracks, the invisible rope between them tugged harder, carrying not only memory, but possibility. When doors splinter. The storm finally reached the walls. It was night when the first crash came, wood shattering, shouts rising like thunder. In Malik's household, Layla jolted awake as guards rushed through the courtyard, their sandals slapping stone. The mistress's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with fear. "Bar the doors! Do not let them in!" But already, the sound of splintering echoed again, closer this time. Layla pressed herself into the shadows, her breath quick and shallow. She saw one of the younger servants bolt for a side passage. A guard struck her down with the flat of his spear. The message was clear: no one moved without leave. Yet the walls shook, dust falling from their seams, as though the house itself doubted it could hold. Across the city, Awa's household shook as well. Raiders, or perhaps desperate townsfolk, no one could say. The merchant had not returned, and the mistress, pale with terror, clutched her children as she barked at the slaves to defend the storerooms. But the slaves had no weapons, only hands hardened by labor. Awa felt the weight of the kitchen knife in her palm, not as a weapon, but as a question. The scarred woman whispered fiercely, "Now, girl! Doors break. If we do not move, we are buried with them." Awa's chest burned. Her eyes flicked to the courtyard gate, its lock old, its frame already trembling. The chaos outside pressed inward like a tide. She thought of Layla, her soft voice, her trembling hands, her stubborn will. If Layla still lived, she was somewhere within this same night of fire and fear. In Malik's hall, Layla found herself herded with other servants into a corner, their backs against the wall. The mistress clutched her rings like talismans, muttering prayers between commands. The guards barred the front, their faces grim. And then, it happened. The gate burst inward, splinters flying. Smoke rolled into the courtyard, carrying with it the sharp cries of men who no longer spoke of trade or order, but of hunger, vengeance, and plunder. Layla's heart leapt into her throat. The world beyond the walls had come crashing in. And in another quarter of the city, Awa lifted her hand to the gate's trembling wood. The scarred woman's grip tightened on her arm. "Choose," she hissed. "Stay and be ashes, or run and be wind." The rope between Awa and Layla stretched taut across the burning city. Whether it would snap or lead them toward each other, either yet knew. The rope untangled. Smoke thickened over the city as screams echoed through broken streets. Layla crouched low, pressed against a fallen wall, heart hammering. Raiders, looters, desperate townsfolk, she could not tell friend from foe. The mistress had disappeared into her chambers, guards scattered, and the servants were left to scramble, to hide, to survive. Awa moved like a shadow through her own household. The kitchen door had splintered. She ducked beneath the frame, clutching a small knife, not to strike, but to cut ropes if she needed to free herself. The scarred woman ran beside her, murmuring prayers and curses in a language older than the city. And then, through the smoke and chaos, Awa saw a familiar figure. A thin shape pressed against the wall, eyes wide but steady beneath soot and fear. Layla. Awa's chest leapt. She ran, ignoring the shards of wood beneath her feet, ignoring the shouts and clamor. Layla heard her footsteps, lifted her head, and recognition flared. A moment later they collided, clutching each other tightly, arms wrapped around trembling shoulders. "Run!" Awa whispered, eyes darting to the street beyond. "The gates are open. The desert waits." Layla nodded, swallowing fear. She began, then swallowed her words. Words were useless now. Survival demanded action, not speech. Together, they sprinted through the chaos, the city's fires flanking them, smoke stinging their eyes. They leapt over debris, avoided the scattered bodies of looters and guards, and found the outer walls, the edge where the city surrendered to desert. Beyond the crumbling gates, the dunes stretched wide, golden and merciless. Awa paused for a heartbeat, glancing at Layla. No chains now. Only the wind. Layla's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then we are free. Hand in hand, barefoot on sand that burned beneath the sun's memory, they ran. The city receded behind them, walls collapsing, smoke curling skyward. Ahead lay the desert, uncertain, dangerous, but theirs to meet on their own terms. And as they ran, the rope that had once bound them in silence, in memory, in shared hardship, became something new. Not a chain, not a tether, but a thread of unbreakable will, stretching across dunes, carrying them forward, together, unbowed, and finally free. The sun rose behind them, gilding the endless sand. The desert had tested them, tried to strip them of life, memory, and hope. But in each other, they had found the strength to endure, the courage to escape, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that no chain, no matter how tight, could hold the spirit of those determined to survive. And so they disappeared into the desert, footprints fading behind them, but the story of their journey, of endurance, of bond, of survival, etched forever into the endless sands.